I want you to imagine getting into a new video game series, or anime, TV show, or book series, and you find that you really enjoy whatever it is that you're watching or playing. You start talking to other people who've seen it, or played it, or read it. You go online and talk about it, and you feel that validation that the way you saw, seen, or viewed something was all the same as what other people thought or experienced. Fun, right? So now, I want you to think about what it feels like to enjoy something, but be on the other side of that conversation, where the way you enjoyed something or read a scene is not really the way that it's intended to be experienced, or at least not according to how other fans see it. They kind of shut down your ideas, maybe start to tell you that you're wrong straight up, even if nothing from the creator says that you're wrong. Doesn't it kind of feel like you're being gatekept? Or being made to feel like you misunderstand things? Because you see, when it comes to Atlus and the mainline Persona series, I really believe Atlus only cares about how you, the player, experiences and enjoys the games. Yeah, Spades, no duh, of course they care about me as a player. That's not what I mean. I mean that Atlus doesn't really care about Canon the way that lots of the fan base cares. In other words, y'all care about Canon way too goddamn much. Canon is kind of a weird term because it's rigid, loose, all at the same time because different authorities treat canon differently. It still needs to be defined as a work deemed legitimate by the author or creator. Something can be official, but still not canon. And official isn't always legitimate. When George Lucas made Lucasfilm and all the spin-off Star Wars novels and comics, they were part of canon, until Lucas himself contradicted something with a new work, and that new work became the canon event. You still with me? You got it? Okay. So how does Atlus treat Persona canon? Well, they treat it like any other company that owns a long-running IP, so they make sense at first, and then they get more confusing the longer it goes. Atlus releases games that all take place in one universe, so there really isn't a lot of confusion there. The numbered games come one after the other, and then you got the spin-off games and the re-releases. And Atlus will take what's established in one numbered game and throw it out the window with a re-release, making the original game irrelevant, which actually creates another problem. For example, Persona 3 released in Japan in 2006. Persona 3 Fest released in 2007, and while it doesn't change the original story, it added the answer in the form of an epilogue story. Persona 3 Portable released in 2009, and it still leaves the original story mostly intact, but there is no mention of the epilogue. And now there's an alternate universe story in which the protagonist is female. Now we have Persona 3 Reload getting announced, and they're not even acknowledging the answer or the female protagonist. So how does someone figure out what's worth consuming in regards to canon when we have one game with 4 separate releases? Persona 4 released in 2008, then Golden comes out in 2012 and adds a new character that's vital to the main story alongside new events that were not in the original game. So the old canon is replaced with a new canon. And if you want to make sense of things, you would have to play the most recent game if you've only played the original. So now you have to play the game twice. Persona 5 came out in 2016, but Persona 5 Royal in 2019 changes a lot of the original game's story in the third semester and adds new characters vital to the plot again, while on top of it changing the fate of characters from the original game. So if you waited all of this time to play the original Persona 5 when it came out, you're gonna have to play Royal to keep up with discussions online and with your friends.
What?
But Persona 5 Strikers was released a year later as a sequel to the original Persona 5 video game, which means nothing from Royal is mentioned or referenced. So does that mean that Royal is not canon, or that it is? I mean, this isn't the most respectful business practice, but Atlus, run your company how you wanna. You have the spin-off games, like the Dancing series and the Q sub-series, they're all assumed to be canon, but not really, because the characters in each of those games all forget that they happen in just about all of them. What I'm getting at is, the longer that I sit down and explain this, the more that we get to understanding that Atlus doesn't really care about canon, or at least it doesn't take priority when they create these games. They're going to establish something and then replace it in a few years, or potentially weaken or strengthen it with a spinoff. That's because Atlus put something above canon when they create these games. But before I even get into that, there's a much more important side that I didn't bring up yet, and that's the fan base's obsession with canon. There's already a bit of confusion about what is canon and what's not canon because of how Atlus treats its modern Persona series and spin-offs, but we get even more messy when we bring in lore and adaptations. There's anime sequels, film adaptations, anime adaptations, manga adaptations, radio dramas, live stage musicals, a lot of extra media to draw on our love and admirations for the games that they're based on. And there's nothing wrong with this much media, really, besides the fact that it's a bit of milking on Atlus's part. But whenever a new form of media or game is announced, overall the question that constantly comes across many fans' brains is the question, is this canon? Or midway through a new game ask, is this choice the canon choice? And it's questions like that that a lot of the fan base loves to obsess over, because these things must be consistent and these things must make sense, not just to us the fans, but for newcomers. And that is perfectly valid. However, the problem that I'm noticing here is that when we obsess and fixate over the canon choice or the right choice, we're leaving no room to enjoy the other options that we're presented with. When we worry and fixate over whether a form of media is canon or not, we choose to not engage with it or see what that has to offer in terms of another experience or something that the creators are very passionate about. When we do that, we're missing the point of it all. The modern mainline Persona games are designed to give the player the experience of going to high school and interacting with your classmates and other people around the city or town that you live in, while also being an absolute badass who defeats shadows and saves everyone. It's wish fulfillment, designed to make you, the player, feel in charge and have agency over your own life. Because the most important experience is the one that the player has. This is represented in all the options in-game to represent how you feel and how you think. You choose what you want to do after school and at night. You choose what to say to the social links or what you want to say in the story. You choose what persona to use to fuse or represent you in battle. You choose how you view the protagonist or the avatar that represents you in the game. Now, don't get me wrong, it's fun as hell having discussions and speculating about canon and lore, like who's the canon romance for the main character, how does this series fit into the greater Shin Megami Tensei timeline, why don't the Persona 4 characters use evokers and they're using cards instead, is the female protagonist canon, or the most important question of all time, what is the canon name for the Persona 3 protagonist? Like, we want to make sense of it all and see maybe what the intentions were of the creators of the series, because we want to understand the smallest of details, and I get that. But a lot of these questions ultimately don't matter, because at least when it comes to the original games, they're always leaving the questions alone and focusing on your own personal experience. The real canon in those games is at least what the player chooses. And that goes hand in hand with the adaptations. The adaptations are adapting the original work, which is the games. So trying to say that any of the adaptations are canon doesn't make any sense at all, because the games trump everything. But that does not mean that those forms of media aren't meant to be enjoyed, because they are. You just shouldn't care about the canon when you enjoy them. Attempting to use an adaptation of a film to narrow down the personality of a character in a video game who's meant to be piloted by the player kind of ends up being a redundant ass way to limit the experience of someone new coming into the series for the first time in favor of the fan base canon. And Atlus has proven that it's not really holding canon in the same regard the fan base does. And as we get more and more concerned with what is canon, we seem to get more and more gatekeepy with certain responses and takes that don't align with what the majority agrees upon. And that's kind of sad. What I'm seeing here is that because we all love these games, we want to feel validation and supported in the choices that we pick in those games. We want to be told that, yes, I made the right choice here. What I chose is correct. Everything else and everybody else is wrong. And you can argue that having optimal choices in the social links created this thought process, but outside of min-maxing, those best choices don't really matter to every individual player. In a social link, you can say whatever you want out of all the options and you're still gonna get to rank 10 anyway. All of the roads end at the same finish line, optimal choice or not. There is still that question, shouldn't the canon matter? And the answer is
I've been waiting for this.
Yes and no. When it comes to canon and lore for a long-running series, creators will sometimes break or retcon things to give themselves more creative freedom and the direction to do what inspires them in the moment. Atlus cares more about themes, messages, and motifs in the individual media they put out over the lore and the canon. This is why you'll never get solid answers to questions like why the investigation team doesn't use evokers, or how the heck Adachi can use a persona if Persona Trinity Soul established that adults can't use personas. You'll just say it's a retcon, because of course it's a retcon. Atlus will release a major mainline series game and then have a sequel with a completely different playstyle, and then release another sequel with another different playstyle and art style, and still says, yeah, that's canon. The Persona series is already a result of breaking from the norms established in the Shin Megami Tensei series, while still saying, yeah, it's canon. So trying to make consistent sense of it all the time is just gonna give you more of a headache, while Atlus is probably already workshopping the 48th Persona 5 spinoff. Or it'll sit here and have endless discussions about a canon name for our protagonist as if this is the name that it should be at all times, when Atlus will continue calling them protagonist in all the core games. But spades, you say. Yu Narukami is the canon name in Persona 4 Arena. That means the name is canon. Well, if you want to make a story around a character who is designed to be silent and the player cannot input as much expression as they normally would in the original game, you would give those characters default names, because giving them an official name just makes things easier for everyone. But if they remake that original game, they're still going to go back and present the main character as the protagonist. But spades, you say. Default and canon are the same thing. You're being dumb. To that, I say they absolutely do not mean the same thing. If something happens by default, it only happens because someone does not do something else. Default pretty much means if nothing else, then blank. Canon means this is the only way it goes. This is the only way that matters. Two different things. Like, this is literally the plot of Across the Spider-Verse. Like, by default, Miles' father should die. But there are other options. That doesn't need to happen by default. The conclusion here is that we care way too much about canon and validating our own experiences with these games, and understand that at least when it comes to the modern mainline Persona games, your experience can be different from the next person's. And not only is that not an issue, but it's that way by design. Everyone's experiences are vital because it's important to them. Maybe someday we'll wake up and Atlus will lay out some encyclopedia that does make sense of every small detail. But until that day comes, I'm going to choose not to obsess over things that don't really help me enjoy the series I love or prevent me from enjoying them to their fullest. Or worse, tell someone that their experience is incorrect because that's not the way that I viewed it. Because the way Atlus views it is that both of our experiences are valid. So let's stop treating the fan base and these options like a quiz, where all the questions have their own specific answer. Treat them more like social links. You got several options, but no matter what you pick, no matter how many points one option might give you, you are still gonna hit rank 10.